If your job is to go hire people for the tech industry, whichever variety of the tech industry that might be, wouldn't you think that it makes sense to hire people who have some experience in that industry?
Thanks for coming in.
Thank you for inviting me.
I really appreciate it. You and I have worked together for a long time. We've worked together on different sides of the fence with regard to, recruitment and recruitment processes. You've always struck me as someone who is very good at dealing with recruiters, particularly on the hiring side of the fence, in a sense of, you know what you want, you're very good at giving clear direction, feedback and everything else, all the things that recruiters need to be successful in doing their job. And one of the reasons why I was so keen to have you, come in and do this was to try and really, get under the hood of what are some of the things that have enabled you to engage recruitment firms successfully in your career, and get the most out of them, whether it's job hunting or trying to fill roles, but also to try and fill in some of the grey in a sense of understanding, well, if you're going to market and if you're trying to hire and all these different things, where is the industry as a whole from a recruitment perspective going wrong? And what are maybe some of the things that the industry should be focusing on to add more value to people like yourself? So without further ado, if you wouldn't mind, for people who don't know Donal McCarthy, giving us just a very high level basic intro.
Sure. I'm Donal McCarthy. I've been in the sort of tech financial industry for the last 23 years, worked in energy trading companies, buy side, sell side, originally as a developer, then leading teams, and so on. So that's me. I have hired a lot of people in my career. So some of it with you, some of it with other people. I should say that these are my own opinions. They're not the opinions of my employer.
First thing that comes to the mind, it can be as blue as you want it to be. When I say the word recruiter,
I find that a lot of recruiters don't actually care about the recruitment process itself. They're just chasing the revenue, which is fine. They have a job to do. But at the end of the day, I have a job to do and I don't want my time wasted. So the first thing that comes to my mind actually is cold calls. I hate being cold called. I hate being cold called by people trying to sell me roles when I'm not gone out looking for them. For the most part, I don't answer the calls. Every now and then I feel a bit charitable and I'll answer a call, but it's normally a fairly short call. And so I prefer to work and build strong and deep relationships with the people that I currently work with. I just have no time for cold calling.
The thing that then you mentioned was recruiters don't seem interested in working with you on the process. They seem interested in just earning a fee.
A lot of recruiters.
How does that manifest in terms of, from your perspective, what are the things that make you go, yeah, you guys aren't really interested in this?
It'll often be irrelevant CVs coming through based on pattern matching. I would have thought that in this day and age we're beyond just simple text searches on LinkedIn or other sources. But it also manifests in, calls to talk about the role, but rarely very relevant questions and rarely much feedback from the recruiters. Now, look, it's not all bad. Sometimes you get good people. But I do feel sometimes that not everyone who's on those panel calls about a role actually necessarily wants to be on those panel calls, if that makes sense.
So like the job kickoff call type thing. Yeah, I hate those things.
Yeah.
I quite like being on them. I just wish there was no other agencies on them because
that's fair enough.
I find they're challenging. And this is quite interesting actually. So what's happening on those calls to give you the impression that those agencies that are on there aren't actually that interested in working on the jobs?
Mainly silence. So I try to avoid these calls at all costs.
I've noticed.
So I try to avoid them because I don't find that they're a valuable use of my time. And ultimately, the reason why we're using recruiters is to optimize my time, right? At least that's one of the reasons. And so what I don't want to do is take some time out, walk through a role, and then have no questions about the role, right? There must be some questions if you really wanted to understand. Otherwise, you could just read the role job description. I mean, why do you need me to come on a call?
Yeah. This is, for me, one of the biggest misconceptions, but also one of the biggest challenges of the industry, because I guess coming at it from a recruiter side of the fence, when you're on these calls with a lot of other agencies, but also in front of someone like yourself, and the hiring manager is a revered entity in the recruitment world, because you're almost the gatekeeper to like where the money is. This is how a lot of people would evaluate that sort of thing. I think the biggest gap in the industry that you and I operate within, so sort of financial technology, trading technology, is the recruiters that operate in that space don't understand anything about the world in which you operate, yet we recruit on behalf of you. So beyond the basic word matching of job description to CV, it says Java here and it says Java here, so it must be there or thereabouts. Beyond that, it seems to me the vast majority of recruiters don't really know that much. And when you get into a world of pre-trade, post-trade, different technologies, different fundamental parts of the business, there's a huge gap in terms of understanding of what that means. And for me, when you get agencies, and I've sat on these things at the end of it where they say any questions and there's 4 agencies on the call and 2 of them won't say a word. I think the reason they won't say a word is they're very wary of looking stupid, because they don't actually understand what you're talking about. And you're, in your head, giving loads of really good candid information to help that job search. They don't understand any of it. And the best case scenario is they default to a question like, how long can you wait for someone? That one always comes up.
Or what's the budget?
What's the budget?
Yeah.
And then normally someone from talent acquisition steps in and says, direct that question to me. You might get something like, I found someone who had this, but they didn't have this, would that still work for you? But I've found in my experience, very few agencies that can actually get into the nuances of like.
But why do you think that is? Like, if your job is to go hire people for the tech industry, whichever variety of the tech industry that might be, wouldn't you think that it makes sense to hire people who have some experience in that industry somehow or other, or to train people, or to get people some insight into it?
So the former, probably not, because I just don't think somebody who's a tech person, there would obviously be exceptions to this, but industry-wise, I don't think recruitment would be the right industry for them, and vice versa. I think they're different skill sets, different mindsets. I would say that a technical mindset is a lot more analytical, numerate, data-driven, stats-driven. Recruiters are more humanities type people. They take a bunch of information, analyze it and interpret it. At the end of the day,
recruiters are selling something.
Yes.
And you should know something about what you're selling.
I fully agree. And this is the latter point. And so to answer your question of why don't they, the reason is that there's a very low bar to entry to get a job in a recruitment company. And when you turn up, you're given KPIs as an agency, make this many calls a day, send this many CVs a week, make this many placements a month. You're never actually given any training, because the people that are the leaders in those businesses don't know anything about the industry either. And I'd like to, and I certainly don't want these conversations to become me just banging my own drum, but I think one of the reasons why we've had a lot of success in terms of supplying is, we're not experts, but we probably know more than most in terms of just an understanding of like what your world actually looks like. But I think that's where, and this is maybe a slightly bigger topic, but if you're looking at the evolution of the industry, I think that with the advances in automation and AI and the ability for every CV to now be written by GPT and look the same, and every agency to reach 10,000 people tomorrow with a job or whatever, that actually the cream of that is going to rise to the top, but the human bit's going to come back into it. And then agencies are going to be much more accountable for like, well, how much do you actually know? But I would say in those calls, it's probably not lack of interest. It's lack of knowledge, and it's a bit of fear of looking silly. And then that defaults down to these kind of fairly pointless questions, you know, that then you're having to answer. And I always feel for people on your side of the fence. It's like, you've got a day job to do.
You know, there's plenty of content out there on the internet for somebody to just learn the basics. It wouldn't kill recruitment companies to give, you know, pointers, links, a little booklet of, you know, of the industry that you're trying to hire for.
Yeah.
Instead of wasting people's time.
I 100% agree with you. And this is a drum that I bang quite consistently is there's an obligation on the industry to upskill its level of intelligence to operate in the world that you're choosing to operate. If you recruit techies or lawyers or whatever, you can't represent that market if you don't know anything about it.
Well, but presumably these recruitment agencies are going concerns making money at the low end of the market, right? Otherwise, they couldn't survive. So something that they're doing must be working. But I don't want to work with those type of recruitment companies.
Yeah. Transactional hiring, 20, 30 hires a month,
Yeah.
where maybe it is less about the person who's being hired and more about what have they done in the last year and are they willing to do it again, essentially. Which I think, again, translates to maybe bigger firms and how they hire, looking maybe at banks as an example, versus smaller entities in the buy side or tech companies or whatever, where actually you need a much more well-rounded skill set where maybe the prevailing factors are less the tangible, what tech do you know? That's a bit of a given, it needs to be there. But it's more the intangible proactivity, conscientiousness, ability to be adaptable and pragmatic.
Yeah, I would agree with all that.
That's where the value is. So if you spin that back then to, you know, you mentioned obviously you've hired lots of people, you've done it in different capacities in, you know, bigger companies, smaller companies, etc. When you're going to market, what are the things you want from recruitment partners when you're going to market from day dot? These calls, you want engagement, we've covered that off, but beyond that, what do you want from agencies?
I think what I want is, if I turn the question around slightly or answer it a different way, right? If I were a candidate and a headhunter came to me and we had a conversation about a role, you know, there would be a few steps that would happen. You know, we might have a coffee, we might talk in broad terms about it, you know, and we might have another call and get into more detail about it. That same process when someone is trying to headhunt someone is what I want on the other side of the fence. So I want to build a relationship with a recruiter. I want them to understand not just the role we're looking for right now, but how that fits in the wider context of what we're doing, you know, what we might be thinking about doing a little bit down the road, what the culture of the company is. Because when they start sending me candidates, I want a whole bunch of those intangibles already pre-ticked, because otherwise it's just, again, going to waste my time. And so that's really what I want. So I don't want to sit on a panel call talking to 4 or 5 agencies. I'm not saying I want to work with 1 agency, 2 agencies, or 10 agencies. I want to work with a number of agencies whereby, you know, relationship can be built and an understanding can be formed by both parties as to what everyone's looking for. And at the end of the day, everyone is looking to succeed here, right? I'm looking to hire a role, and whoever the agent is looking to earn the revenue on top of that. Well, I can tell you, for me, the best way to do that is to understand my needs, and then you'll have half a chance of actually meeting them.
Yeah. So it's always...
And it won't be a panel call where that happens.
Yeah, it'd be a coffee, conversation,
Yeah.
glass of red or whatever it might be, but
Face-to-face conversation.
trying to actually get under the hood of, like, and this is where I think a lot of the disconnect is as much as firms would love to be able to hire, you know, through referrals and direct sourcing and everything else, and there's certainly a big space for that. But I think there's always going to be a bigger space to need outside partnership to bring the right talent in. And it's an important part of the industry. And I think for agencies, the lack of time spent really trying to actually understand, like, an agency's they've never worked in a bank, they've never worked in a hedge fund, they've never been a technologist. They have no comprehension of what a day in your life looks like outside of the recruitment piece. even to a fundamental level of like understanding that you sitting there reviewing resumes and doing interviews is not your day job. And it's a big time consuming process that actually is not that important relative to the day-to-day job. How do we streamline a process where we can get you to where you want to get to, i.e. filling a role, as quickly as possible with the least amount of time spent?
I 100% agree. They should upskill themselves. And I think they'll find that hiring managers probably would welcome more, now not with everyone, because like you said, we have day jobs, but would welcome that more interactive kind of session to so that the recruitment agent can understand where we're coming from, the culture, the company, the stresses, the pressures, everything. There's one thing I want to pick up on there though, which is, you said they don't realize that hiring is not your day job, or reviewing CVs is not your day job. See, I have a slightly different view on that. I wear lots of hats. On any one day, I could be doing 20 different things, from speaking with senior management to working with the most junior developer to reviewing CVs, whatever it might be, cutting code. But one of the things that I do enjoy doing is building a strong team. And so I don't mind, and I do actually see it as part of my core part of my role, is to review CVs, is to think about how the team is structured, is to think about, where the weaknesses and gaps that we could fill and how we do that. Now, because I wear so many hats, I have to find an optimized way of doing that. And so my main point is really that I want to have an optimal way to get that information. So the last thing that I want is to look on a recruitment tracking system and see 10,000 applicants to one of my roles where 9,995 are LinkedIn entries.
Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned, I don't look at any of those. But I'm hoping for the fact that, some of these tools can maybe filter the LinkedIn submissions, because I'm 100% sure that of those 10,000 applicants, there are some amazing people in there that somehow or other just, crapshoot, lottery ticket person is in there. But I'll never find them.
Yeah,
so I rely on a recruitment agent to help reduce that list down to a set that I'm actually have the time, or not to have the time, but that are worth my time reviewing.
Yeah, and I think that's the important point. An agency's never going to understand your role better than you do, but to upskill enough that they understand, as you mentioned, the stresses, the pressure, the must-haves versus the nice-to-haves versus the what does it just take for somebody to be successful in our environment. But also, what do we offer as an environment so that you can now communicate back to the market so that for the right people, it's compelling for them. And I think that's then a second point is, you spoke about people calling you and pitching you jobs and stuff. I'd imagine a big struggle for someone who is a senior individual in this space. They maybe move jobs every 5, 6, 7 years, passive, but maybe the right thing comes along and they're willing to take a look at it. But the importance of the recruiter that's making that outreach, even being able to articulate an opportunity accurately in terms of capturing is it actually worth having a conversation or not? There's so many places to go with it. The thing I wanted to ask you, just to stay on the topic of adding value from a hiring perspective, is let's say that you've got an agency that have done that initial point, they understand what you want, you've had the coffees, they've got relationships. Process as it progresses now. Most interview process are 3, 4, 5 stages in this day and age, particularly for perm hiring. Where does the agency start to add value at that point? They've proved they can find you people that are relevant enough for you to want to talk to them. Latter stages, what do you want them to be doing?
I never believe we're at the latter stages until we've actually got a signed contract. Yeah. So what I would want is for the agents to not take their foot off the gas, but to still funnel in more applicants for 2 reasons. One, we may not close the deal. Someone may be counter-offered. Someone's background check might fail. All of these things have happened in my career. In certain places, we offer people jobs, they sign, they just don't turn up, right? So that happens as
Really?
well.
Right.
So,
Okay.
not recently in my career, but I've definitely seen that in the past. And so, not taking the foot off the gas, providing some more candidates, even though we might be at latter stages in the process, because for the second reason, it's often good just to meet candidates to build a portfolio of potential candidates for a role. Even if you don't have a role, we're always hiring, right? It's just a matter of time before we're going to be hiring for the next role, or we may be considering changes in the organization. And so I think that there's a role for recruiters to introduce candidates who may be passive, and where there is not, and where everybody knows there isn't necessarily a role on the other side either. It's just an introduction. Hey, here's what we do in XYZ space. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, and, just an introduction. Now, obviously, the candidate must have a view that they want something maybe to progress. It can't be completely cold. So it's a networking opportunity. So those types of opportunities, I think, can add a lot of value, because often we will go back to people in our network and we'll hire them. And if those people are introduced in our network through an agency, well, then the agency is on the hook for the revenue. So that's good for them.
Only for 6 months, though, normally.
Well,
So this is why that's not as prevalent as perhaps you'd want it to be.
yeah.
Speaking purely from an agency perspective, there's a big risk of we proactively introduce you to great people on a speculative basis. You say, we'll have a chat. Great. You meet someone, build a network. Yeah, we don't have a role right now. 6 months and 1 day down the line, we've decided to hire that person, but we're not going to pay you a fee because you're outside of your ownership period. Now, a lot of firms are not like that, and they see the value of good agency partners, and actually these people they do introduce us to good people, so we want to build a partnership with them. But there's also a lot of companies that would look at that and go, yeah, we're not going to pay that fee. And that's the fear on the agency side of...
Well, you know what they say, no risk, no reward.
Well, this is true, but, also I think there is a certain... and again, maybe this is a degree of short-termism that dominates the industry.
It's totally a degree of short-termism. And if you enter into that type of engagement with someone in the spirit of doing it in good faith, then you shouldn't expect that things wouldn't work out, right?
Yeah.
But I totally take the point that there are plenty of times where it might not. But then that's the, like I said, no risk, no reward.
Yeah, and this concept...
Calculated risks.
Yes, and I think this concept of short-termism is a big one, because even though I think of you and I, we first, I think, communicated, connected, started sort of speaking to each other in 2016.
That's a long time
So
ago.
it's 8 years ago. And in that time, we've done countless coffees. But there is a sense now of, I will always prioritize you if you're hiring, and I will ensure my teams prioritize you over someone that I don't really know. And then I'd imagine there's probably a kind of an opposite side of that on your side, which is like, well, I know that I'm going to get looked after and it's going to be taken seriously and I'm going to get honesty and feedback or whatever. It's less about trying to make a placement today than it is about trying to build networks and relationships with good people in the industry that will serve me as an agent, as a recruiter over time. And that's maybe where a part of this gap is. It's just a short-term mindset. I don't necessarily know the right ways to solve that, but that concept of kind of proactive engagement and partnership is something that the industry probably on the whole is lacking.
Yeah, but I mean, I think you're right. But I would also say that there are certain niche skill sets, and to be honest, this probably does happen to an extent. There are certain niche skill sets where there are, forums, user groups, industry conferences, where is it really a massive investment for an agent to go along and introduce themselves and, have a chat and just listen, just hear what's going on, talk to people, understand their roles. I mean, what an absolutely brilliant way to get a load of free information and meet some people.
Yeah.
And when those people are looking for a role, they remember you, right?
Yeah.
And maybe you can make yourself memorable,
And I think it's not hard.
Sponsor an event.
You don't even need to do that. Just be credible.
Yeah.
Okay, so proactively supplying good people, building relationship. The concept of it's not done till it's done. So continuing to send applicants until it is done.
And also continuing to connect with applicants.
Yeah.
And ensure that, not in a overly zealous way, but continue to sell the role on behalf of the company, to the point that they do sign. If they get a counter, help them understand, the merits of taking the counter versus not taking the counter. I mean, that's a difficult thing to do, but you kind of know what you're selling. Obviously, you have a direct remuneration issue if the candidate doesn't sign, because now that's a risk with no reward, right? Yeah. So obviously, every time you put someone forward, you're hoping that it kind of hits. So I think hand-holding candidates, helping them understand the opportunity. If they walk away, they walk away. But at least you would not have left them without anyone to talk about the opportunity, right?
On the offer piece, so you've identified a candidate that you like. We're at that point of like, look, we're sort of thinking about making an offer. And then it starts to become a little bit more brass tacks, nuts and bolts, start talking about money and all the rest of it. At that point, I feel there's a lot of grey in a sense of it becomes a bit smoke and mirrors, it can do. At that point, you kind of need the agency a little bit on both sides. So
yes.
There's a candidate.
No, I agree.
And let's start with as a candidate. So if you think of your historical experience moving jobs over the 20 odd years, when you're in those points of like, right, they want to offer you a job, how can an agency in those scenarios add the most amount of value to you as Mr. Individual who's evaluating this job opportunity?
What's never that clear is, who does the agent represent? They have an engagement with the hiring manager, so they represent the firm in which they're trying to sell a role into. But it's almost like the candidate would want to feel represented by the agent to ensure that their interests were taken into account and protected.
Yeah. And the agency have a vested interest in the candidate getting more money normally.
Yeah.
Based on how they're paid and fee structure.
Although I would imagine that that's kind of a lopsided kind of arrangement, right? The candidate might want to push for a little bit more. Presumably the agent would rather just close it at slightly lower because it won't really make too much difference to them.
Yeah.
Rather than annoy the hiring manager on the other side.
Yeah.
And so it's very unclear as a candidate, because the candidate can certainly feel like the agent is in their corner, but it's very unclear what the candidate should expect from an agent. So I'm going to turn the question around on you, and why don't you tell me?
I mean, I can only give you my, I guess, how we do it and what I think is important in that point. For me, fundamentally, I want everyone to leave with a party bag. So I just want Mr. Client and Mrs. Candidate to be happy, because then by default, I'll be happy as well.
Matchmaker.
Well, yeah, I mean, to an extent, because, I know this anyway, but from when you hire, I am never, ever going to convince you to hire someone that you don't want to hire. And I'm also never, ever going to convince somebody in our space to take a job that they don't want. For whatever that reason might be, whether it's, culture or progression or tech, whatever it might be. I think the best practice for an agency, first of all, is to stop trying to sell anything. Represent things to the best of knowledge, and then be honest on both sides about what that looks like and what it means. And I've found the more you're honest with people, typically, the better you do. When it comes to negotiation, the conversations I'm having with a candidate is basically, look, full disclosure, the more you earn, the more we earn. So we're not working against you to try and limit your compensation, for example. But if we are having conversations with you about limiting your compensation, it's to put you in a position where you're not going to negotiate yourself out of this job. And I find if we do the job early in the process of being clear on expectations on both sides, so presenting to a client, look, this is where this person's at currently from a comp perspective. This is ballpark kind of what their expectations are. But then try and work with the candidate to actually have an honest conversation about, look, how much do you actually want this job? And what do you see to be the onward potential for it? And I think actually where maybe, and this is going a little bit off topic, but where a lot of candidates falter is they evaluate jobs based on the now. So it's all about, well, what are they going to pay me now? I'm on this, so therefore I want this, and I need this percentage uplift or whatever. And I sort of try and say to them, okay, but where would this put you in 3 years' time? In terms of like, what sort of opportunities might it open up for you if you have this name on the resume, or you have this exposure, or this ability to learn a new skill? And how much are you pricing in what that means money-wise? So is there an argument to maybe don't nail your colours to the mast on money now and focus more on finding out, is this the right place for you? And have faith that the money will come.
I think that that's a difficult thing for people to do. But before I expand on that, one thing struck me there as I was listening to you. I think that the word agent, like recruitment agent, agency, has negative connotations. And actually what you've been describing is more what I would kind of consider more as a sort of a brokering.
Yeah.
Right? Almost a recruitment brokering, people brokerage.
Yeah.
And that's something which is much more honest, right? And I don't know why, and I don't know if it's just me, but I sort of see that differentiation there. If you ask me again, what does recruitment agent mean? I'd kind of go, if you said, well, if I said, what does a recruitment broker mean? I'd say, oh yeah, I understand that more. That's a fairer kind of way of looking at it. Anyway, slight aside.
Yeah.
If you're only moving roles because of money, it's probably the worst idea to start with.
Do people move just for money though?
No, but hang on. So if you're moving, if you want to move, you would expect to be fairly compensated. And if you expect to be fairly compensated, it's not about, now versus 3 years' time. It's just about, do we have the same mark to market on what the word fair means right now? And then, the assumption should be, or at least my assumption would be, that if I'm moving because I want the role and I'm expecting to be paid a certain amount, I'm just speaking personally, I wouldn't expect to be paid that much. I'd expect to be paid whatever the number is that I was happy with. And I would be thinking about the long-term view. But if that original number didn't hit my expectations, then that would still be a problem, I think.
And this, I guess, is maybe
But it's not short-termism. It's just a differentiation in, or difference in how you would value the person versus the person's view of themselves.
And this, again, maybe comes back to, in the earlier part of the process, it's the job of the recruitment broker to maybe have fairly open, upfront, honest conversations from day one about where the market's at and what would be considered reasonable, rather than leaving it till the end, but to have a conversation with Mr. XYZ person who's tentatively maybe looking at the market and go, look, based on where you're at, this is kind of what's reasonable. And this is sort of how the market moves. This is what our data says based on we've placed 100 people in the last 12 months with these firms. And this is the average in terms of uplifts or whatever, but try and steer that a little bit more.
And that data does exist, right?
So every recruitment company know exactly what people are on and what they get offered.
But interestingly, hiring managers get that data, but candidates don't get that data.
Yeah.
So they don't know where to fit themselves. So they don't know whether their valuation of themselves is any way realistic or not, right? Because it's a self-valuation. And I think, again, probably some of the value that a recruitment person could do is try to shine a light on that for people.
But yeah, because oftentimes we will be given a mandate of hire XYZ. Sometimes there's a very defined budget, and then it's sort of quite an open conversation with a candidate at the beginning, but sometimes there's not. And you are in the concept of, we're asking people to effectively price themselves, because we want to make sure that when we're sending resumes to a client, we're giving at least a ballpark steer on comp, if for nothing else, to make sure that no one's wasting anyone's time. But to try and avoid these, sort of really horrible end of process situations where everyone's invested time and then the money's a long way off. But I do think for people in the market, particularly people maybe they job move once every 4 or 5 years or whatever, they don't know this stuff. So to kind of go, well, price yourself. It's like, well, where do you start? How do you know if you're overvaluing yourself, if you're undervaluing yourself? But again, that goes back to the argument of the obligation, in my opinion, is on the agency to be more than a recruitment agent and to be more, broker or a bit of a concierge style of service, but just a facilitator of the data's all there. It's just a case of like badging it up and applying it and just having fairly honest, open conversations. We don't work on behalf of the candidate, but at the same time, we have a big vested interest in that candidate getting everything they want. So it is a fuzzy kind of dichotomy of who represents who here, and actually how should all the stakeholders engage to get the best out of it. To kick it the other way, so as a hiring manager, same question. We're now at offer stage. You're going to an agency and saying, we like this person. We're pretty close to when to move forward. What's best practice on the agency side at that point for you to help you?
Just close the person. That's, I don't have a lot to say on this one. I would hope that all the things that you've just said, which are, the conversations have already been had so that there is only going to be talk about realistic compensation. Therefore, the chances, that we've done the right things along the way, where you've found the right subset of people who are interested in a role, not just interested in comp, right? That's the first and foremost. We've then put them through a, strenuous process to try and ensure that there will be culture fit. You said, we sort of assume the tech is there, but actually we don't. At least from my perspective, I want to assume that, but it's a trust and verify, and we do very intensive verification.
I don't mean assume they.
I know what you mean. It's all I'm saying is that the people that I hire will always have the tech skills.
Yes, that's what I mean. It's a given.
That's a given.
They have to have it, yeah.
But I don't assume that, right? So we put them through a very strenuous process. So if we assume that, if we say we found the right subset, we've whittled it down to one or two candidates, gone through all the tech interviews and the culture fit interviews and the just how do you think, how do you approach things type interviews. And the conversations have been had about realistic expectations around compensation, and they understand the culture of the company and where their career could go. So career prospects, very important, and I think that's something that an agent can definitely provide a candidate. In so much as also a hiring manager can do. Then at that stage, I don't really. The process at that point is pretty opaque to me, right? I just hear someone's signed, I go, yay. I forget about it for, until they come in. Maybe there's a touch base with the person along the way. But it's kind of outside my remit at that point.
You mentioned subset of candidates that are interested in the role as opposed to just being interested in comp. To what extent do you think people take jobs for the role versus take jobs for the company within which the role exists? Like, how much is there a part of that that's more important? Is it all about the role? Is it 50-50? Is it more about the company and just getting in the right place?
Honestly, I don't think I could really give you a good answer here. I could only answer for myself. And at least for myself, it would be all about the role, essentially. I would hope that most people are moving for the right reasons. But I suspect that some people just want to get into a certain name because they've heard that that's a great place to grow their compensation, basically.
Yeah. There's value for the CV by having the name.
Yeah, I'm sure that's the case. I actually have never hired somebody like that. They would have been weeded out in the process.
So they've got to show genuine level of interest and passion for the day-to-day of what it's going to be in its whatever the present incarnation is.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's very easy to spot people who are interested in something or not interested in it. One of my favorite questions that I'll ask a candidate is, tell me about your favorite project. It's just an open-ended question. And the level of detail and passion that comes out in the answer is worth 50 other questions that I could have asked.
Yeah.
And so the people who don't have that passion, and someone who says, oh, it was I worked on something for blah blah blah, and they're done in 30 seconds. X.
Yeah.
Gone from the process.
There's I often find with the best interviewers, candidates often come out saying, didn't really ask me anything, because they would ask a big open-ended question like that. And actually the depth of the answer answers your next 5 or 6 questions.
Yeah.
Or it doesn't. And then you know that you don't need to ask them anyway.
Yeah. But also it gives you a lot of things to drill in on along the way. And so you can tell when somebody knows what they're talking about because they won't stop talking about it.
Yeah.
Right? And you'll have to stop them.
I get a lot of messages on LinkedIn from people who are very interested in getting into the buy-side world, mostly engineers. And I would say the common template of that person is someone who's maybe approaching sort of in a VP type level, very passionate about the tech. They know that their kind of next promotion is maybe pushing them more into management. They're not so keen on that. They want to move into the buy side. But because of the environments they're coming from, which are predominantly larger organizations, banks in particular, or big tech firms or whatever, they tend to operate in these fairly tightly controlled verticals where it's hard for them to get outside of their lane. And the sort of the sense of it is, I'm trying to get into a hedge fund, don't really know how, I'm making applications, I'm not really getting in interviews, or I'm not being successful in the interviews. If if someone's watching this who's kind of at that sort of level, would you have any advice for those people in terms of what can you be doing within those sell sides, either within work or in your personal time, that's going to make you more appealing to a hedge fund hiring manager who's reviewing a bunch of CVs or interviewing a bunch of people and is looking for those really good egg kind of A player type individuals?
It's a very difficult question because obviously oftentimes people are quite constrained in what they can do within where they work, the seat that they're in, and or they're, they would find maybe difficult to find the time to do extra stuff. However, I think for me, the answer is that you have to be doing deeply technical pieces of work, and they don't have to be things that you are asked to do by whoever it is that you work for. I would recommend thinking about, what is the, if you look objectively at the system that you're working on, what is the one thing that, you could really improve if you just had the time to do it? Like maybe it's, a batch job takes, 5 hours to run and you think you could get it down to 5 minutes. Maybe it's, a way of doing a calculation which hasn't, which is more optimal than what you're doing. And I would do that. And I would find the time to do it. And that might be some of your own time, that might be working late. And the reason I would do that is because when you come to an interview, you can actually have that interesting conversation, right? What is the thing that you're most proud of? Oh, well, I had this thing and nobody would ever touch it because they were all afraid about breaking it, and it was taking 5 hours and it was causing a lot of stress in our lives, and I dissected it and I figured out a way how to make it much, much faster, blah, blah. That's the passion that we're looking for, right? That's the thing that differentiates you. Now, what's a little bit difficult is that would be very difficult to come out on a CV alone. So they almost have to get into the process, but then when they're in the process, at least they'll have something very meaty to talk about that they can be passionate about, right? The very fact that you would do it to start with is actually an indicator that you would be successful on the buy side, right? Because you've taken the initiative and you've done something that's really good and impactful, and those are the people that we're looking for.
And maybe there's a little bit of real estate there for the better, recruiters out there to have those conversations with those people and say, talk to me about things that you've done that you're proud of or that you enjoy or whatever.
Yeah.
But start to present that to you, as opposed to, it doesn't need to be captured on a CV. I'm sending you this person to review because here's a CV, but also they've done this.
Yeah, a little bit of color on it.
They've done this.
Yeah.
And then you're going to have a little bit more conviction in saying that person's probably worth me spending 45 minutes or an hour or whatever doing an interview.
For sure. Yeah. I think actually having that sort of little bit of commentary would actually really help in general. Now, if you can't do something at work, there's open source projects. There's a way to make a name for yourself. That could work as well, right? And that does pop a little bit more probably on CVs if you've, I don't know, on the extreme end of it, if you've committed something to the Linux kernel or to a major Apache project, that type of commitment can pop on a CV, but it's a little bit double-edged, I would say, because you're going to give out your GitHub. Right. And anyone who gives out their GitHub, I go to people's GitHubs. And when I see, they've committed like 3 times in the last 9 months and there's a bunch of rubbish code in there or there's no code in there, it undoes the story a little bit. So you got to be careful, I think.
So Git, either do it properly or don't do it.
Do it properly or don't do it at all.
Yeah.
Same as anything in life, I would argue.
That's probably a good way to end. Do it properly or don't do it at all.
Yeah, exactly.
Donal, thanks very much. Appreciate you coming in. I'd love to do it again sometime.
No, it's been fun. Thank you.
Thank you very much.